Moving to Elmwood Harbor was supposed to be my fresh start, a quiet suburban enclave tucked along the coast of a mid-sized American city. The roads were lined with sugar maples, their branches arching to create a leafy tunnel overhead. Neighbors smiled when we crossed paths on the sidewalks, and the air smelled of salt water drifting in from the local marina. Everything felt peaceful, a far cry from the high-pressure life I'd recently left behind. I hadn't told many people here about my past. For the most part, all they knew was that I was a freelance consultant who worked in sports-related ventures. They didn't know I had 4 Olympic medals, 2 gold, 1 silver, 1 bronze, but that I'd been on the cover of numerous sports magazines at the height of my swimming career. After stepping away from professional competition, I craved anonymity, some sense of normalcy. I wanted to live life on my own terms for a change. My new house was on a quiet cul-de-sac in Elmwood Harbor's Lakeside Ridge community. I learned quickly that Lakeside Ridge had a homeowners association, HOA, with a reputation for strictness. As I unpacked boxes in my living room, I found a thick envelope near the front door, presumably left by a neighbor. Inside was a glossy Welcome to Lakeside Ridge booklet, plus a long list of rules and regulations. Many seemed harmless, if overly detailed. Guidelines for paint colors, noise ordinances, yard decor, trash placement, and so on. I shrugged it off, assuming it was standard for a suburban HOA. Little did I know, the Lakeside Ridge HOA wasn't run by ordinary folks. It was dominated by one overbearing personality, Maribel Arkwood, though I'd soon learn that nearly everyone secretly called her Karen. The rumor was that she'd earned that nickname for her condescending, intrusive, "I want to speak to your manager" style in dealing with neighbors. For 2 weeks, I scarcely saw Maribel. I'd hear her name in whispered tones, neighbors referencing Karen did this, or Karen yelled about that, but I hadn't met her in person. Meanwhile, life was pleasant. I set up my home office, took morning runs around the Lakeside Trail, and discovered that the community pool was just a few blocks away. On especially hot afternoons, I'd stop by for a quick dip to maintain my training regimen in a casual way. It wasn't an Olympic-sized facility, of course, but it was enough for some laps. At first glance, the community pool was wonderful. A wide rectangular swimming area framed by manicured hedges, lounge chairs, and bright blue umbrellas. A small kiddie pool sat off to the side. A few part-time lifeguards, mostly college-aged kids, kept watch from tall chairs, rotating shifts. Families flocked there on weekends, packing picnic lunches and blow-up pool toys. Seeing everyone enjoy the water gave me an odd sense of nostalgia for my days at training camp, though the vibe here was definitely more laid back. It felt good to swim without the intense pressure of official practice sessions. Then, one afternoon, I noticed a stern-looking woman stalking the pool deck, clad in a wide-brimmed sun hat and pastel pantsuit, of all things. She moved from lounge chair to lounge chair, scolding people who left towels on the ground or failed to place trash in the proper receptacles. She even admonished a father for letting his toddler splash in the shallow and too vigorously, claiming it was disruptive to other swimmers. I suspected this had to be Maribel, Karen in the flesh. Her voice rose above the hum of conversation. This must be a family-friendly environment. No roughhousing, no loud music, and definitely no outside floats bigger than the posted size. She pointed dramatically at a paper sign taped to the fence. "We have rules, people." The father offered an apologetic look while gently retrieving his toddler from the pool. I ducked my head, deciding not to introduce myself just yet. Something about Maribel's demeanor screamed, danger, drama ahead. So I quietly finished my laps, dried off, and slipped away. But I had a nagging feeling that our paths would cross soon enough, especially with how often I planned to use the pool. My official introduction to Maribel Karen Arkwood happened a few days later. I was in my front yard, pulling a few stubborn weeds from the flower bed, when a glossy black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a woman with that same wide-brimmed sun hat, her posture rigid, clutching a leather-bound clipboard. Marching straight up my driveway, she barely glanced at me before scanning the house, the yard, the shrubs. I rose to greet her, brushing dirt off my hands. "Hello. Can I help you?" Her gaze flickered to the half-filled yard waste bag near my feet. Are you the new homeowner on Redwood Lane? I nodded. Yes, I moved in 2 weeks ago. I'm Maribel Arkwood, she interrupted, extending a quick handshake. Vice President of the Lakeside Ridge HOA, though I'm effectively in charge of day-to-day operations. Welcome. Her mouth formed a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. She adjusted the brim of her hat. I'm here to ensure you've received our community guidelines and that you understand your responsibilities. I try to keep my tone pleasant. I've read over the guidelines, yes. Everything seems pretty straightforward. Her eyes darted over the yard, as though searching for a violation. I see you haven't planted the official Lakeside Ridge perennial arrangement. Residents typically keep a uniform look: hostas, lavender, and daylilies. We do have an approved list of flowers. I pointed to the new shoots near my walkway. I have some lavender. Just no daylilies yet, but I'll look into it. She nodded curtly, making a note on her clipboard. Then her gaze shifted to the side of my house, where a short fence enclosed the air conditioning unit. Make sure you're aware of the fence height regulation, too. We can't have mismatched fences. Ours is a cohesive neighborhood. After all, she jotted something else down. Now, about your membership dues. I suppressed a sigh and nodded along. She recited the entire fee structure, including small surcharges for pool maintenance. Interestingly, she stressed that the pool was an optional amenity, but strongly discouraged people from shirking their share of the cost. Her speech felt oddly controlling, as if she had personally funded the pool and wanted everyone to remember they were in her debt. Finally, she snapped her clipboard shut and offered another plastic smile. If you have any questions, you can reach me via the HOA hotline number in your welcome packet. I trust you'll abide by all rules, yes? Of course, I said politely. Thank you. With that, she spun on her heel, marched back to her SUV, and drove off. As her vehicle disappeared down the street, I exhaled. So that was Karen. I understood immediately why the nickname stuck. The condescending tone, the sense that she was perpetually on the hunt for wrongdoing, and her obvious delight in controlling the neighborhood. I had the distinct feeling that if a small rule wasn't obeyed to her satisfaction, I'd be hearing about it in a nasty letter. Over the next couple of weeks, I fell into a pleasant rhythm in Lakeside Ridge. Mornings doing freelance consulting calls, afternoons writing articles about aquatic sports, and evenings swimming leisurely laps at the community pool. The lifeguards, usually teens or early 20-somethings, were friendly enough. They'd occasionally notice my strong stroke technique and joke, "Hey, you should do this for a living," and I'd just laugh it off, never revealing my Olympic background. I wasn't ready to wave that flag around. I just wanted peace. One evening, while I was drying off after a good workout, I spotted Maribel on the pool deck again. This time, she was in an animated argument with two older women who were complaining about something. I caught a snippet of the conversation. "You can't raise the fees again just because the water heater broke," one woman fumed. "That's part of routine maintenance." Maribel responded with a tense smile. Routine maintenance or not, the HOA must pass along costs. And might I remind you that if you find these expenses too high, you can simply opt out of using the facility. She said this with a shrug, as if everything were that simple. The second woman, arms folded, retorted, "This pool is part of why we bought our homes here. Now you're threatening to take it away if we don't keep paying extra?" Maribel's face twisted in an annoyed expression. "We're not removing it, dear, just ensuring everyone pays their fair share. If we can't afford lifeguards or advanced filtration systems, that's not my fault. The HOA has a tight budget." I frowned as I listened. Could the HOA's budget truly be that strained? Or was Maribel funneling funds into questionable areas? The two women eventually stomped off, muttering under their breath, leaving Maribel to glower at them from across the pool. I dried my hair, a sense of foreboding creeping over me. It seemed Maribel's moves regarding the pool and its resources weren't simply about rules and guidelines. It was also about power and money. A small voice inside me warned that her agenda might soon threaten the very essence of this community space. Sure enough, about a week later, a rumor swept through Lakeside Ridge. The HOA might be cutting back on lifeguard services or possibly eliminating them altogether. I heard it first from a neighbor named Cassandra, who walked by my house one morning as I was grabbing the mail. "Have you heard about the lifeguards?" she asked, pressing a hand to her chest with concern. "Maribel says we don't have enough budget to keep them on duty." My stomach clenched. That's ridiculous. We have families with young kids using that pool. Cutting lifeguards would be dangerous. Cassandra nodded vigorously. I know, right? But she's insisting that we're wasting money on an overly lavish amenity. She claims swimmers can sign waivers and just be responsible for themselves. I was stunned. Sure, some community pools operate without lifeguards, but typically they're older adult communities or smaller complexes. Lakeside Ridge, on the other hand, had a diverse population, including many children. Getting rid of lifeguards was a recipe for disaster. Accidents could happen, swimmers could slip under the water unnoticed, and tragedies could unfold in an instant. No matter how careful parents and individuals might be, having trained lifeguards drastically reduces risk. Determined to learn more, I swung by the pool that afternoon. One of the guards, a college sophomore named Diego, confided that Maribel had already told them the board planned to cut hours soon and possibly let some of them go. "It's messed up," Diego said, perched on his tall chair, arms folded. "She acts like we're a luxury. But last year I helped pull a kid out of the water who was having trouble. If we're not here, who's going to intervene?" I blew out a long breath, frustration building. "We have to do something." Diego shrugged. "Talk to the board or the other residents." But Ms. Arkwood practically runs the HOA by herself, for what I hear. She rarely listens to complaints. I thanked him for the info. As I walked away, my mind churned with worry. Lifeguards are vital for a pool full of mixed-age swimmers, especially kids. I also thought about my own training. I come up through local aquatic centers, always supported by dedicated staff, coaches, and safety professionals. The idea of stripping away that safety net felt outrageous. If push came to shove, perhaps I could intervene personally, but I couldn't always be at the pool. Besides, it wasn't my job to single-handedly watch over the entire community. That evening, I knocked on a few neighbors' doors, casually bringing up the lifeguard situation. The reaction was unanimous: confusion, anger, or both. Parents were especially worried. One mother told me her 3-year-old son had nearly drowned last summer, if not for a watchful lifeguard. Another neighbor recalled an elderly gentleman who had a fainting episode in the shallow end, again, saved by the quick actions of on-duty lifeguards. It became clear that Maribel, our resident Karen, was out of step with the majority. Most people wanted the lifeguards. However, Lakeside Ridge had a timid culture when it came to challenging the HOA. "She's threatened fines for the smallest rule breaks," said one exasperated father. "So I can't imagine how she'd retaliate if we openly oppose her." Retaliation. That word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fear. Maribel seemed to relish her role, using official-sounding letters, warnings, and fines to keep residents in check. No one wanted to be on her bad side. I decided to check the official HOA website for upcoming meetings. Maybe I could speak out in a formal setting, present logical reasons for keeping lifeguard coverage. Indeed, there was a board meeting scheduled for the following Wednesday evening at the community clubhouse. A perfect chance to make a reasoned case, especially if I could rally other neighbors to attend. When I mentioned the idea to Cassandra, she sighed. "Good luck. Those meetings are basically Maribel's stage. She has a handful of supporters who always back her proposals, and everyone else is too intimidated to speak up. But I'll come if you want me there." Thus began my quiet mission. Encourage as many neighbors as possible to attend the HOA meeting and demand the retention of lifeguards. I knocked on doors, chatted with folks at the grocery store, even lingered outside the pool to catch swimmers as they left. To my relief, many agreed with me. They said they'd try to make it. Still, a knot of anxiety coiled in my gut. I'd been in high-pressure arenas before, Olympic stadiums, televised championships, but this felt different. I was wading into local politics, where personalities and petty power plays could overshadow common sense. And the Karen, at the center of it all, was known for her cunning. I could only hope that the community's collective voice would be enough to sway the board. Wednesday night arrived. The community clubhouse brimmed with people, a turnout larger than typical, based on the worried chatter echoing through the small hall. Foldable chairs formed rows facing a long table where the HOA board sat. At the center of that table, wearing a pastel blazer and an expression of smug confidence, was Maribel Arkwood. Her eyes flicked across the crowd, momentarily revealing a flicker of surprise at the attendance. But she quickly recovered, rapping a small wooden gavel. "I call this Lakeside Ridge HOA meeting to order." Beside Maribel sat an older man named Henry, introduced as the HOA president, though whispers suggested he was essentially a figurehead, and a couple of other board members. They read through a standard agenda: landscaping, upcoming community events, budget allocations for street repair, and so forth. My foot tapped anxiously, waiting for the mention of the pool. Finally, Maribel cleared her throat. "Now, the next item. We have a proposal to curtail lifeguard services at the community pool starting in 2 weeks. The pool will remain open, but swimmers will utilize it at their own risk. Signage and disclaimers will be posted. This measure is to alleviate unnecessary expenses from the HOA budget." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Arms shot into the air. Maribel raised a placating hand. "We'll allow a brief public comment period." She glanced at a watch. "Keep it short. We have other agenda items to cover." A mother of 2 toddlers stood up first, her voice trembling with frustration. "Our children are not strong swimmers. We rely on lifeguards to respond if they get into trouble. Please reconsider. This could endanger lives." Several in the audience nodded, but Maribel only offered a thin-lipped smile. "The HOA is not a babysitting service, my dear. Parents must supervise their children at all times." A father in the back rose, reminding the board that drownings can happen even with parental supervision if an adult is momentarily distracted. The presence of trained lifeguards drastically reduces that risk. Maribel, eyes steely, retorted that such caution was precisely why disclaimers and waivers would be introduced. Swim at your own risk. I exchanged a look with Cassandra. The room crackled with tension. Gathering my courage, I stood up and walked to the small microphone stand set up for comments. Heart pounding, I looked at the sea of neighbors, then at Maribel. Cutting the lifeguard service is not just a budgetary matter. I began, my voice resonating more than I expected. It's about the safety of children, teenagers, adults, even seniors. The cost savings can't possibly outweigh the value of human life. Maribel arched an eyebrow. So you say, but do you have any hard data? The cost alone. Hard data? My voice sharpened. I can pull up statistics from the Red Cross and aquatic safety organizations showing how supervised swimming areas have significantly fewer accidents or fatalities. We all know the difference a lifeguard can make. She pursed her lips. Well, the reality is that we have a limited budget. Unless someone here can conjure extra funds for this so-called luxury, it's irresponsible to continue paying for staff. I fought back the urge to mention my own finances. Technically, I could sponsor the lifeguards out of my pocket, but that wasn't the point. We were a community that deserved safe amenities without having to rely on one private donor. Plus, it would draw attention I didn't necessarily want. So I pressed on with logic and ethics instead. A round of applause and supportive murmurs rippled through the chairs. I saw nods from many neighbors. Yet, as I finished, Maribel let out a theatrical sigh. We appreciate your passion, but again, where is the money? The budget is tight. Unless people want to pay higher HOA dues across the board, we can't justify continuing lifeguards full-time. The moment she mentioned higher dues, I saw some residents shift uneasily. The fear of extra monthly fees was strong, especially among retirees on fixed incomes. Maribel seized that hesitation like a hawk. She hammered home that the entire neighborhood would have to chip in and that we can't rely on intangible arguments about intangible benefits. Ultimately, Henry, the nominal HOA president, called for a vote among the board members only, standard procedure apparently. 2 of the board members looked torn, but they nodded with Maribel. Henry gave a sad shrug. The measure passes, he said quietly, with a review to revisit the decision in 3 months. Cheers did not erupt, just an uncomfortable hush, punctuated by a few gasps of dismay. Families with small children looked visibly upset. So people marched out. A few lingered, hoping for more explanation. Maribel shot me a triumphant smile from across the table, as if she'd personally outplayed me. Inside, I seethed. The board had spoken, but it hardly felt like democracy. It felt like tyranny. In the wake of the meeting, Lakeside Ridge was rife with unrest. Families outraged by the cut in lifeguard coverage confronted Maribel in the streets. She refused to budge, repeating her mantra that the HOA couldn't sustain the cost. Late-night social media discussions popped up on neighborhood forums. Some folks argued that if we'd only raise dues a little bit across everyone, we could afford lifeguards. Others pointed fingers at alleged HOA slush funds for Maribel's pet projects, like decorative flower beds and administrative fees that had questionable justification. I spent several days making phone calls and doing research. I discovered that the yearly budget for lifeguard staffing was not as enormous as Maribel claimed. Roughly $8,000 to $10,000 over summer season. In a community of a few hundred homes, that wasn't unmanageable, especially if spread out over the membership. Where's the money going instead? Why did it always seem so tight? In my search for answers, I found an ally. Keith, a former accountant who'd lived in Lakeside Ridge for over a decade. He had clashed with the HOA in the past, suspecting irregularities in financial reports. Over coffee, he showed me older statements from prior years. Look at these line items for consulting and administrative overhead, he said, tapping the paper. They ballooned after Maribel was elected vice president. She basically forced them through the board. She claims these are necessary for professional management support, but no one knows who these consultants are. I scanned the documents, my eyebrows rising. The amounts were suspiciously high. If that money were used for the pool, it might easily cover lifeguard for the entire summer. So you suspect something shady? Keith nodded grimly. Either nepotism, like paying friends of hers for phantom services, or downright embezzlement. But I can't prove it yet. And folks here are scared of crossing her. I thought of how Maribel had brazenly manipulated the fear of higher dues to pass her motion. If she really was misusing funds, then cutting lifeguards was not about saving money. It was about diverting it where she wanted. My anger simmered. That same evening, I strolled around the pool area, now stripped of lifeguard chairs, except for minimal weekend coverage. I spotted a father and his little daughter timidly walking along the pool's edge, presumably extra cautious in the absence of supervision. The worry on his face was heartbreaking. I realized then that regardless of cost, we could not allow this to stand. One accident, one drowning, and the entire community would suffer the consequences, and an innocent family could be shattered. On my way out, I saw Maribel standing near the gate, arms folded. She gave me a pointed glare, then turned away. The silent message was clear. She considered me her adversary now, and she would not go down without a fight. Well, neither would I. Something in me snapped that night. The knowledge that Maribel might be funneling HOA money for personal gain and risking resident safety was too much. I decided it was time to wield my own influence, even if it meant breaking my vow of anonymity. I placed a call to a friend of mine, Rachel, who happened to be a regional sports reporter for a well-known news station. We'd met back when I was competing. She interviewed me after I qualified for my first Olympic Games. Over the years, we'd stayed in touch on friendly terms. I explained the situation in broad strokes. A suburban HOA was canceling lifeguard services, endangering families, and possibly misappropriating funds. I hinted that the story involved a certain former Olympic swimmer who lived there. Rachel's interest peaked immediately. "You want me to run a story on this?" "I need more details," she said. "But it sounds like something local media might pick up: public interest, community safety, possible corruption." I hesitated. "I'm not trying to destroy anyone's reputation unjustly, but we need the spotlight on this. Maybe if the HOA sees the negative PR storm coming, they'll reverse course on lifeguards. I'll provide as much evidence as possible about the questionable finances." Rachel agreed to look into it. She cautioned me that going public with my name and Olympic background might draw attention I hadn't had in years. Paparazzi might appear. People might spin the story in ways I couldn't control, but I was prepared to handle it if it meant protecting the neighborhood children and uncovering the truth about Maribel's shady practices. Before we went full throttle, though, I wanted to ensure the community was on board with me. So I organized a small meeting at my house, inviting a select group of concerned neighbors. Keith came with his financial documents. Cassandra and other parents attended, relaying anecdotes of near misses that lifeguards had prevented in the past. We discussed the media approach, the possibility of presenting a united front, and the potential fallout. There was some trepidation, especially among older folks who hated confrontation, but the majority felt we had no choice. If she's really funneling money away, one mother stated fiercely, then we have a right to blow the whistle. We drew up a plan. Gather as many old HOA financial statements and meeting minutes as we could, highlight suspicious line items, compile personal testimonies about the importance of lifeguards, and prepare to go public through Rachel's news channel. I would be the spokesperson, using my Olympic background to give the story extra credibility. We hoped the pressure would force the board, or at least Maribel, to restore lifeguards. If the evidence of misappropriation was strong enough, maybe law enforcement or local government agencies would get involved. We all realized it was a gamble. Taking on Maribel risked her wrath, but at that point, it felt like we were already marked. Better to fight back as a group than suffer in silence. A few days later, Rachel and a small camera crew rolled into Lakeside Ridge. We arranged for some interviews near the pool, tastefully done, without disturbing residents who were actually trying to swim. Cassandra spoke on camera about her fears for her kids. Keith quietly showed a few heavily redacted financial documents, explaining the suspicious spike in consulting fees. When it was my turn, I stood by the pool fence, looking into the camera. Rachel prompted me. So, please introduce yourself and your connection to this issue. I took a breath. My name is Michael Groves. I'm a resident of Lakeside Ridge. Some viewers may know me as a former Olympic swimmer. I competed in the last 2 games, and I have 4 medals. I moved here seeking a peaceful environment, but I can't stand by while the HOA eliminates lifeguards, jeopardizing the safety of our neighbors, especially the children. Rachel nodded, a spark in her eyes. Why do you believe the HOA is doing this? I glanced at the documents in my hand. We suspect the budget crisis is artificially inflated. There's evidence that certain funds have been diverted to questionable expenditures. The short version is that residents might be paying for services that never materialize, while essential needs like lifeguard coverage are cut. We talked for maybe 15 minutes. I emphasized that a single drowning would be too high a price for any so-called cost savings. The camera crew captured B-roll footage of the half-empty pool, the large swim at your own risk, and lifeguards on duty signposted at the entrance. Just as we were wrapping up, we heard an angry, shrill voice from behind. "Excuse me, who authorized this?" We turned to see Maribel stalking toward us, face pinched with rage. She wore a lavender blouse and crisp white pants, her posture rigid. Rachel, sensing drama, gestured for her cameraman to keep rolling. I swallowed hard, bracing for impact. Maribel planted herself between me and the camera. What is going on here? We do not allow unauthorized media on HOA property. Rachel calmly replied, "I'm Rachel Anders, Channel 9 News. We're reporting on the recent elimination of lifeguard services in Lakeside Ridge." Maribel flashed a humorless smile. Those lifeguards were a drain on the HOA budget, and the board voted to remove them. That is the end of the story, Ms. Anders. Now, kindly pack up and leave before I call security. Rachel responded politely. Residents invited us. They have legitimate safety concerns, and we're investigating claims of financial mismanagement. Maribel's eyes darted to the camera lens. Utter nonsense. We are a well-run community. Anyone suggesting otherwise is simply misinformed. The board decision stands, and we do not answer to local journalists fishing for a scandal. Her tone dripped with hostility. Rachel tilted her head. Would you like to address the allegations of questionable invoices and unaccounted funds in your budget? That question made Maribel's cheeks flare. No comment, she snapped. Then, turning to me, She hissed, "I knew you were trouble the minute you moved in. Sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, stirring up drama. You and your so-called Olympic status won't intimidate me." I stayed calm, meeting her glare. "It's not about intimidation, Maribel. It's about making sure nobody drowns in that pool, because we skimped on safety." She stomped her foot. "If you continue this baseless smear campaign, I'll ensure you face the full consequences. Understand?" Rachel's cameraman zoomed in on Maribel's furious expression, capturing every syllable of her threat. At that point, she turned and stormed off, muttering about lawsuits and defamation. It wasn't the end. Rather, it was the start of a very public conflict. True to her promise, Maribel threatened legal action. The next day, I received a cease and desist letter from a law firm claiming to represent the Lakeside Ridge HOA. The letter alleged that my false statements and unsubstantiated allegations were damaging the community's reputation. It demanded an immediate retraction. Otherwise, they'd sue for slander. I forwarded it to Rachel's team and, discreetly, to a lawyer friend of mine. Both said essentially the same thing. They're bluffing. If anything, it looks like they're trying to silence you. Let's see if they really want to go to court, because that would open them up to discovery, and you could subpoena all their financial records. Meanwhile, Rachel's story aired on the 6 o'clock news, featuring interviews with concerned residents, footage of the deserted lifeguard chairs, and my own statements about water safety. The segment ended with a call for the Lakeside Ridge HOA to provide clarity on its budget. Social media lit up. Outraged viewers demanded accountability, while others said it was the HOA's business and not the public's. Regardless, pressure mounted on Maribel. A few days later, the state's Department of Health issued a notice indicating they'd be reviewing the pool's classification. If it was considered a public or semi-public pool, certain safety regulations might apply, possibly requiring lifeguards depending on usage and occupancy. This was big news. The community pool was heavily used, so it might fall under stricter guidelines. If so, Maribel's plan to skimp on staffing wouldn't just be unethical, it might be illegal. The next major bombshell came from Keith. He'd discovered additional financial documents, showing that a large chunk of HOA funds went to a consulting firm registered under the name of Maribel's cousin. This firm had no credible history and no clear deliverables. It seemed like a shell company. Keith shared these documents with Rachel's investigative producer, who was giddy at the prospect of a corruption expose. Maribel's behavior only grew more erratic. Neighbors reported that she stormed around in the evenings, checking yards for petty infractions. She threatened to fine people who left holiday decorations up even a day past certain cutoffs. She plastered letters on doorsteps accusing families of conspiring against the HOA. The tension in Lakeside Ridge was palpable. It felt like the entire community was in a standoff, waiting to see who would blink first. Amid the chaos, the unthinkable almost happened. On a hot Saturday afternoon, a local family threw a birthday party at the pool, having apparently forgotten or chosen to ignore the new no lifeguards policy. About a dozen kids splashed in the water while parents set up balloons and snacks. Everyone was distracted, trying to manage the party festivities. At some point, a little boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, drifted into deeper water. He wasn't wearing floaties or a life vest. I'd gone to the pool that day just to do a few laps. Luckily, I was standing by the pool edge, still wearing a t-shirt and shorts, talking with a neighbor when I noticed the boy's head slip below the surface. He started flailing. Nobody else saw. The chatter and laughter were too loud. Instinct kicked in. Without hesitation, I dived in, fully clothed, reached him in a couple of swift strokes, and lifted him above water. He coughed and cried, his tiny body trembling. A moment later, his panicked parents came rushing over. Everyone gathered around, some calling 911 in case he needed medical attention. Fortunately, he seemed all right, just shaken up. The father stared at me with relief and gratitude. Thank you," he gasped, hugging his son. I didn't see him slip under. I tried to keep calm, adrenaline surging in my veins. "He'll be fine. Just stay with him, keep an eye out. And next time, make sure there's a designated watcher when there's no lifeguard on duty." Word of the incident spread quickly, eventually reaching Maribel. She was strangely quiet when confronted by furious neighbors demanding to know why there wasn't a lifeguard who could have prevented this near tragedy. One mother unleashed a tirade in front of half the neighborhood, telling Maribel, "We could have lost a child today. This is on you." Maribel tried to deflect, claiming parents are responsible for supervising their children at all times. But the damage was done. Everyone knew that a trained lifeguard might have spotted the boy sooner, possibly preventing even that brief moment of terror. And the more that details emerged of me diving in to rescue him, the more the public narrative turned against the HOA. People demanded an immediate reinstatement of lifeguards. Under intense scrutiny, the Lakeside Ridge HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting. This time, half the neighborhood showed up, crowding into the clubhouse to witness the showdown. News reporters hovered outside, eager for updates. Maribel looked drained but still clung to her defiance. Henry, the nominal president, opened the floor. Residents shared stories of close calls, frustrations, and fears. They demanded a vote on reinstating lifeguards immediately. The volume in the room soared. Maribel, trying to regain control, slammed her gavel. "We understand your concerns, but we cannot simply conjure money from thin air, unless you're volunteering to pay more." At that moment, the door opened and in walked two individuals in suits, flashing badges. They introduced themselves as representatives from the state auditor's office. Apparently, the news coverage and public outcry had prompted an official investigation into the HOA's finances. Cameras from local media panned to capture everyone's reactions. One of the auditors spoke calmly. "We have reason to believe certain funds have been misused, including those allocated for pool maintenance and staffing. We're here to request full financial disclosure and compliance. If the board refuses, we have a warrant." Maribel's face turned ashen. Henry stammered that they'd cooperate fully. The crowd erupted in murmurs and gasps. The second auditor explained they would be performing a thorough audit of all HOA accounts, including the questionable consulting fees. Then they politely asked everyone to vacate while they secured documents from the HOA office. It was a surreal spectacle, residents filing out, hush falling over them, while a furious Maribel glowered. I caught a glimpse of her losing her composure, hissing at Henry, "How could you let it come to this?" He merely shrugged, looking defeated. Within days, the story escalated further. The auditors found glaring discrepancies, including large payments to that shell company consulting firm belonging to Maribel's cousin. Additional evidence hinted that Maribel had used HOA funds for personal expenses, lavish dinners, a weekend spa retreat, and even a short cruise. The worst part? She'd apparently done it for over a year, covering her tracks by inflating the budget shortfalls for the pool. With these discoveries, the local prosecutor's office got involved. Charges such as fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of community funds started swirling around Maribel's name. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of Lakeside Ridge residents demanded an immediate emergency election to remove her from the board. She refused to step down, claiming she was a victim of a smear campaign by that meddling Olympic swimmer and his conspirators. Few people believed her anymore. The legal proceedings moved faster than Maribel probably anticipated. The state auditors produced ample evidence to suggest she'd siphoned tens of thousands of dollars. Prosecutors filed formal charges. Her assets were frozen pending further investigation, including her lavish home on the nicer side of Lakeside Ridge. People whispered that she was in danger of losing everything if the court found her guilty. During this tumultuous period, the HOA board, stripped of Maribel's controlling presence, convened another emergency vote on pool safety. They unanimously decided to reinstate lifeguard services, funded in part by reversing Maribel's questionable consulting allocations. Henry, shamed by his complicity, resigned, and a new, more transparent leadership took the helm. Amid the swirl of legal motions, depositions, and public outrage, Maribel tried to defend herself. She insisted she'd done nothing wrong, that the money was legitimately spent, and that the community was targeting her because she was the face of order. But the mounting evidence proved otherwise. She had no plausible explanation for the shell company or her extravagant personal charges. Ultimately, the judge found that the risk of her fleeing or hiding assets was high enough to require substantial bail. When she failed to post it, she ended up behind bars awaiting trial. Once the dust settled, neighbors breathed a collective sigh of relief. The media coverage died down as well, though sporadic updates on Maribel's case still appeared. I walked through Lakeside Ridge with a sense of cautious victory. We had exposed corruption and restored a critical safety measure at the pool. More importantly, the community had taken back its power from a tyrannical figure who misused her position. With Maribel gone, the new HOA board authorized a thorough financial audit, returning missing funds to the rightful budget lines. The pool soon had a full roster of lifeguards, even better trained than before, and a renewed sense of community spirit blossomed. Families felt safe, kids laughed, and splashed in the water. The sense of fear and tension that once clung to Lakeside Ridge lifted. Keith told me he felt vindicated after years of suspecting something was off with the finances. Cassandra and other parents thanked me repeatedly for taking a stand, though I insisted it was our collective effort. I was just the spark that ignited it. As for me, I continued to swim laps in the community pool, enjoying the calm once again. Occasionally, a child or teen recognized me from the TV coverage or from old Olympics footage that circulated online. They'd ask for swimming tips or request a selfie. I gave them a friendly wave and a few pointers. My anonymity was largely gone, but I didn't mind anymore. I'd learned that using my platform for good could unite neighbors and safeguard lives. Meanwhile, Maribel's downfall was swift and brutal. She was convicted of fraud and embezzlement after the paper trail showed undeniable misuse of HOA funds. The judge imposed a prison sentence of several years, citing the betrayal of community trust as an aggravating factor. Additionally, she was ordered to forfeit her property, her once pristine house in Lakeside Ridge, to help repay the misappropriated money. Rumor had it that she tried to appeal, but with so much evidence against her, the outcome was unlikely to change. On the day the local news reported her sentencing, Lakeside Ridge was strangely quiet. A few neighbors felt sorry for her on a human level, wishing she hadn't taken such a destructive path, but most felt a sense of justice done. She had terrorized the community for too long, hidden behind a facade of maintaining standards, and disregarded the importance of people's lives and safety. Now, she faced the full consequences. In the weeks and months following Maribel's dramatic fall, I often reflected on how a suburban HOA dispute could escalate into an all-out war. But I realized that, at its core, it was about everyday people standing up for what's right: safety, transparency, accountability. Without the combined voices of parents, concerned neighbors, and eventually a persistent media spotlight, we might have lost something precious. The peace of mind that comes with knowing children can enjoy their pool under the watchful eye of a trained lifeguard. I also learned a lesson about the power of my own name and reputation. For years, I shied away from any spotlight, not wanting to be defined by my Olympic medals. Yet, stepping forward and using that cachet in a positive way made a difference here. People listened. The news covered it. Perhaps that influence was exactly what was needed to protect my new home and neighbors. Today, Lakeside Ridge is more united, more transparent, and definitely safer around the water. The pool thrives, complete with lifeguards, updated safety equipment, even occasional swimming lessons funded by the HOA. Families splash and play, and sometimes they cheer me on when I do a fast lap. I still find joy in those simple, unpressured swims, remembering how the water has always been my refuge. As for Karen, Maribel Arkwood, her name lingers in hushed anecdotes, a cautionary tale about arrogance and greed. She lost her prestigious position, her property, and her freedom, all for the sake of controlling the community and siphoning funds. While I take no pleasure in her downfall, I do hope it reminds everyone, myself included, that no one is above consequences and that true community values protect all members, especially the most vulnerable. And so, life at Lakeside Ridge goes on, calmer and kinder without the storm clouds of Maribel's reign. I wander these tree-lined streets, feeling a sense of belonging I never imagined when I first arrived. I may be an Olympic champion, but here, I'm just another neighbor who fought for what was right. And that's all I ever really wanted.